Hey y'all, welcome to our session at Build. Welcome to the Student Zone. I'm Kat, I'll be your moderator today. And we're gonna first quickly go over the Microsoft Code of Conduct for this session. So Microsoft Code of Conduct, it's basically everything that you would expect. Our mission is to empower every person and every organization on this planet. So during the session, we'll be taking questions in the Q&A chat, and just make sure to keep things respectful and no harassment or anything like that, but pretty obvious things. Cool, so let's meet our speakers for today. So first up, we have Michael. He is a program manager in Azure Networking, and he'll be going over a bunch of the slides about how the cloud is more than just a thing in the sky. And we also have Heather, who's a software engineer too. And she'll be talking over some of the cloud things as well, and also be running a really cool demo at the end. And we'll be taking Q&A during that demo as well. Off to you, Michael.
Awesome. So hey everyone, like Kat said, my name is Michael Aldridge, and I get to work in Azure. So cloud computing, networking, storage. The idea is you probably don't know much about those words or those ideas right now. So hopefully what the session will do is it can give you kind of the building blocks to better understand what cloud computing is. It's a really big movement right now. I think you'll see a lot of companies shifting to the cloud space. And so our idea is to equip you with the building blocks to really build a better understanding that you can grow from. And so to start, what is cloud computing? It is more than that thing in the sky. And so just to start with the basic definition, it's really the delivery of games, apps, really any resource over the internet. And if you've been following Microsoft, Amazon, a lot of these big tech companies, a lot of our current investments is in the cloud. And so what we're going to do today is try to break down this understanding a little better, give you some real world examples that you can relate to. And then I'm going to kind of break apart how Microsoft runs Azure on the high level, and then also introduce some of kind of the basic concepts of what cloud computing is. And so to start, so I know the cloud's kind of it's a heavy subject, it's a big subject. And so we like to start with an analogy, the power grid. And so let's take you back. I know there's a lot of grilled cheese lovers in the audience. Most likely I myself am a grilled cheese lover. And so let's take you back to a time before the power grid, before electricity. And let's say you wanted to make a grilled cheese. So a really simple act, something that we do today with the power grid. But prior to that, building the grilled cheese or grilled cheese sandwich was actually a pretty big task. To get started, you have to have a fire source, which we have represented by the fire right there. You obviously have to have some sort of matches or something to start the fire. You have to have some sort of kindling to get the fire going and really ignite it to make it cookable for the sandwich. And then you have to have some logs to sustain the fire. And then additionally, and lastly, once you were done cooking your sandwich, you also had to have some sort of means to put the fire out. And so as you see, something that with the power grid now, that's really easy for us to do. You just kind of snap on electricity and gas, if you will, and put the sandwich over. It's a lot harder back in the day without the power grid. These are all the different components that are effectively hidden from you that someone without this technology would have to do in the past. And so contrast that with today, like I was saying, the power grid came out. And so now we have some sort of utensil that connects to it. The power grid is effectively what gives us energy. You slap your grilled cheese sandwich on top of the burner and melt all the cheese that you want. Behind the scenes, though, and this is important too, I think this is where we start introducing some ideas or some themes when it comes to cloud computing. There is a power grid. So there's someone who's actually maintaining the controls of the power grid. There's power lines that are actually distributing all of the energy to the different appliances that are using it. And most importantly, there is actually a factory that is generating all of this power. And so as you can see, something as simple as making a grilled cheese, where in the past you have your stove plugged in, you put your sandwich on top of the burner and let the cheese melt. It's actually a really impressive feat, everything that's going on in the background in the distance. And so that's actually a really good way to think about cloud computing when you compare kind of the older way of creating a grilled cheese, where you have to gather all the wood, all the fire, you have to prepare all the material yourself just to be able to start consuming the energy, versus what you can do now with the power grid. And that's actually what we see with the cloud. Application delivery back then before the cloud involved a lot of different components that we have on the screen. Obviously, you have to write code, so you have to be able to kind of code up that application and design that service. You as a company, if you're trying to offer that to consumers, have to buy a bunch of computers and then have to buy physical storage to house all those computers. You have to connect all of your computers to one another and then connect it to the internet to give access to your customers. You have to hire people to maintain and fix the computers as they go down. As more people starting to use the app, you have to maintain that. And then ultimately, there's times when servers go down, or maybe the physical building that you're hosting the computers in goes down, and you effectively have to start all over. And so the main idea here, the main takeaway in this slide is you realizing how extensive and really how difficult it is to actually offer applications, offer websites, offer games pre-cloud. As a company, there was a lot of costs you had to take on. There's a lot of different components you had to manage. And at any step, if one of those components failed, it really created a large risk that you may not be able to offer your service reliably to customers. What we see with the switch to the cloud, and I know the cloud may still kind of be ambiguous and abstracted, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but application delivery is really easy now with the cloud. Effectively, all you do is you write code. You then rent services from a cloud provider, and that rent services piece is really important. We'll come back to that. But you rent services from a cloud provider to host all of your code, your applications, your content. Consumers are able to then use your services, and you as a company, you as a user, whatever space you're using the cloud in, you're able to actually just focus on developing and improving your product. The cloud really abstracts a lot of what we call infrastructure, a lot of the management, a lot of the components from kind of you as a user, and allows you to focus on just improving your product for customers. Business reasons why we need it, and it's important to understand that the cloud space and cloud as a technology, it's obviously kind of an engineering concept and an engineering space. It's also a business space that has business reasons for adoption as well. And there's three pretty easy ones that I think are good bases, they're good foundations. One, it's actually cheaper. It is really expensive to rent space in warehouses, to buy all of these physical servers and computers, and to kind of hire the personnel to make sure all of those are running correctly and that all the facilities are working properly. It's actually more efficient too, and we'll get into this, and there may be some questions later down the road around this that I'm happy to answer. But just the ability for you to be able to write code and then push it to some sort of server over the internet really quickly allows you to be more efficient in how you're developing services, games, apps, whatever you're developing for your customer, and makes it a lot easier. And then it's highly scalable. And I think this will really become apparent when I start to share out the next slide. But let's say you're developing a website for one person or maybe 10 people, whatever it is. It's a lot easier to be able to scale that audience from 10 to hundreds to thousands to millions just by effectively renting more resources or more powerful resources from the cloud provider. So I know that's a lot, and there still could be some areas that are pretty unclear, and that's okay. Like I said at the beginning, the main thing to hold on to is that analogy of the power grid. Without the cloud, you're having to buy the fire, stoke the fire, buy the matches, the kindling. With the cloud, you're using the power grid, so you're renting all of those resources from someone else. And that renting piece is really the big idea here behind cloud services. What I'm sharing out right here is actually a map of the Azure regions that Microsoft operates. And so what I'm going to do now is do kind of a deep dive into how this all works. And so like I said previously, cloud services are rented. A question you may have is, well, where are these services rented from, or where are these services running? A really important component when it comes to understanding cloud computing and learning more is that at the end of the day, these cloud services are all physically located and they're physically stored on computers that are globally distributed around the world. And so any cloud provider, if you look at Amazon, if you look at Microsoft Azure, if you look at Google, they all operate and own physical data centers around the world. And so that's what this map is right here. In kind of Microsoft and Azure talk, we call them regions. And so Microsoft actually operates and owns and manages 58 data centers or kind of sets of data centers worldwide that customers rent resources for when it comes to cloud computing. You can see too, over 140 countries available. And so the main idea I want you to take away from this is that in order to as a provider to offer cloud services, and then even as a customer to consume cloud services, you really are renting resources from physical data centers that are managed around the world. At least in Microsoft's case, there are full teams, entire organizations at Microsoft that are dedicated solely to running the physical security of these data centers, running the cooling and the electricity of these data centers, making sure everything is operational so we can offer quality services to our customers. I can tell you that without these teams, without these physical data centers, the cloud really wouldn't exist. So that's kind of the main idea there. There may be some questions around here that I am happy to answer down the road. But what I'm going to do now is kind of introduce this idea of what the three components of cloud computing are. Really quickly, here's another picture of what those data centers may actually look like. And so as you can see, they're physical warehouses, really large spaces. There's racks and racks and rows of physical servers. When we talk about renting resources, if you're a consumer renting resources from Microsoft Azure, you're actually renting physical space on these servers that you see in this picture. And so that's where the physical image really comes into play here. So like I said, the next part, that's kind of an overview of conceptually what the cloud is and physically how it's run, how it's distributed. Now what I want to do is actually introduce the three different components of cloud computing. Another way you can think about this is the three different services or resource types that you can rent as a consumer. And so those are cloud computing, cloud storage, and cloud networking. And so what we're going to do kind of for the remainder of the time is I'm going to introduce each concept, explain it in some sort of detail. And then I'm actually going to walk through an example with Walmart as an Azure customer. And so Walmart actually runs a lot of Walmart.com out of Azure. They're kind of e-commerce, their website. And so I've kind of simplified it in a way, but I want to just walk you through some examples of what it looks like to rent these services and how Walmart may be doing that as a consumer of Microsoft Azure. So to start, cloud computing, simply put, this is receiving and responding to requests for information. And so before we get into the example, what I really want to make sure is clear here is that as a consumer, when you are interacting with cloud computing resources, it's effectively enabling you to send some sort of request to, let's say Walmart.com, say, hey, I want to see what this product is like. So you send that request to Walmart. Walmart is renting the compute services in Azure where a server receives that response. It's able to process it. And so the compute is really that processing, the ability to receive the response, process it, unpack it, and then be able to, receive that request, process it, unpack it, and then reply with that response back to the user, you as a customer. And so if you're taking Walmart.com as an example, let's say it's holiday season and you are looking to order some sort of Xbox controller for your friend. She's a big gamer, just bought an Xbox, is really into gaming. And so you wanted to help her out. You wanted to buy an Xbox controller to be able to play with her. And so you log on to Walmart.com, this landing page loads, and then let's say you click and you kind of hover your mouse over that image of the controller right there, and you see kind of this detail pop up on the side. I'm kind of referring to that white text that's there. It says daily deal drop, day 10. So it just gives you some information about gaming. What kind of happens behind the scene there is your computer that you're surfing on, whether it's an iPad, a mobile device, a computer, you're actually sending a request to some sort of server to say, hey, I want some more information about this product. The server is receiving that and it's responding back with information that you may need. And so the same thing happens if you were to click into this controller to actually view the different types, the different colors, the prices, different information about it. That same exchange of, hey, I'm requesting information and there's information that the server is responding with is important. So that's kind of where the cloud computing comes into play. Happy to take more questions too during the Q&A that maybe speak to cloud computing a little more specifically. But what we're going to do now is go on to storage. And so cloud storage is really actually renting the physical space in a server to store all your regular files. And so the best way to think about this is, let's say how you're watching this broadcast right now. Maybe it's on a laptop, maybe it's on a desktop, maybe you're on a tablet, or maybe even your phone. All of these devices have physical spaces to store files, to store images, applications, all of the applications, the services that you interact with daily. There is a dedicated space of storage that you're accessing those files with. And so the same applies to cloud computing. When a company is renting storage services from a cloud provider, let's take Microsoft Azure as another example, they're actually logging in to some sort of interface to be able to manage a physical server that is storing all of those assets that they need. And so if we go back to our example with Walmart, let's say you click into that controller icon that was on the previous page, or that controller image, and you get redirected to a search on walmart.com with all of these different Xbox related products. You can see on the far left, there's a bundle console with a bunch of games, and you can just see there's a lot of different images that Walmart responds with, a lot of different products that Walmart responds with. And so this is a good demonstration of storage, because at the end of the day, all of these images are being stored somewhere. And so you have some sort of web server that Walmart is running their website off of. Think back to that compute resource where they're receiving and responding to requests for information. And then you also have some sort of database where Walmart is storing all of the images, text files, all of the actual information you want to see as a consumer. That's being replied, and you're actually being able to consume that as a consumer. And then the next piece, and this is actually where I worked within Azure, is networking. And so the best way to understand this, and then I'll talk about it in the cloud space, is fundamentally networking is what connects different devices that are running a service. If you have a computer that needs to be able to access certain files, you need a network to connect your computer to whatever server is storing those files. And so the same thing happens here when it comes to cloud resources. When companies are renting compute resources and when they're renting storage resources from Azure, they need to also rent networking resources to connect the storage to the compute in that way. I don't necessarily have a specific example for Walmart right here, but what I wanted to do, what I think would be more impactful, was actually show you an image of the global network that Microsoft manages. And so one important thing to keep in mind, we talked a lot at the beginning about this idea that the cloud is really all of these physical data centers. It really is, at the end of the day, physical servers that customers are renting resources for. To kind of deep dive or to double click on that, customers are actually utilizing a cloud provider's network to also connect all of the resources that they're renting. And so what this image is right here is actually an image of Microsoft's global network. Microsoft does operate one of the largest global networks in the world. And what I mean by this is all of these dotted lines right here are actually physical fiber cabling that Microsoft manages and procures to connect all of their different resources. I know there's a legend in the bottom left-hand corner too. And you can see kind of data center and edge. For now, just focus on that data center, that green kind of circle. All of these green dots are those Azure regions that I showed on the beginning map towards the beginning of the presentation. And so as you can see, Microsoft actually manages, runs, and operates physical cables and fiber connections between all of their data centers. And so what this enables you to do as a customer is that if you're renting all of these cloud resources from Azure, you're able to connect resources that are being served from different Azure regions. And that's really important here. I can tell you before the cloud, and if you think back to that diagram I showed at the beginning, where it showed kind of the phases for application delivery, we had to buy all these resources, you had to connect them. It was really manual and really difficult to do. Now, as a customer, you can rent compute resources, you can rent storage resources, and you can connect those with networking resources, and you can offer a service to a customer globally within a day, within hours, depending on kind of the scale there. But it's a really impressive idea that the cloud enables someone to really spin up these services and offer them globally to users around the world. So that was kind of the lecture component. Heather and I did prepare a demo, and what we're going to do is we'll can kind of share out a GitHub repo afterwards. And there's a lot of kind of documentation on just the Azure website. If you kind of just Bing or Google Azure documentation, the point here is that there's a lot of interactive demos. There's a lot of interactive learning materials you can use. And so we'll make sure to somehow get the GitHub link out to you to be able to run a demo like this. But what this is supposed to demonstrate, and kind of our hopes, our takeaway, is now that you have some sort of fundamental understanding of what the cloud is, you would start to interact with some kind of fundamental learning resources to maybe start renting resources in Azure, start renting resources in these different clouds. And Kat has kind of a couple of resources to share with you all now, and then we will break into Q&A.
All right. Heather, are you able to?
Yep, I can go ahead and take it away with the demo.
Great, thanks.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming out today. As Kat mentioned in the beginning, I am Heather and I am a developer in Microsoft Office. So Michael is a PM that works heavily with Azure, actually developing Azure, and I spend my daily life developing applications on Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief demo about what that looks like, and we can take questions as we're waiting for things to spin up. So I'm here in Visual Studio 2019, and I have this code, which is just a static website. And so we have our HTML, we have several JavaScript and data files, and I want to go ahead and connect this to Azure. So the way that I do that is I right click and go Publish Web App, and that'll bring me into this Publish Profile view. And so I go ahead and I start going through that, and I want to publish this website to Azure. As Michael noted, Azure allows us to spin up a variety of resources that allow us to deliver our applications to people over the internet. And today we're going to deploy a simple Azure App Service or a web app. So thankfully, Michael has agreed to lend us his subscription, so he's paying for the bill for today. And if I go out to the Azure portal, so this is portal.azure.com, I can see these are a bunch of resources that Michael has in his subscription. And what I want to do first is create a new resource group. And the purpose of this resource group is to give me the opportunity to store all of my resources in a logical way. It's kind of like in the File Explorer when you have folders that keep your files grouped together in a logical way. So I'm going to go ahead and create a resource group called Build 2020, and I'm going to put it in the West US2 region, and I'm going to go ahead and create that. And within a few seconds, boom, I have my resource group. So I go to the resource group and I see right now there's nothing in it, but we can change that fairly quickly here. So Visual Studio is asking me to sign in so it can see my resources. And while we're waiting for Visual Studio to sign in, does anyone have any questions over the phone that we can answer?
I'll ask a question from the chat here. Maybe Michael, you can answer this better. What do you think about hybrid approaches to computing on-premise and in cloud? Where does it make sense to have this hybrid approach?
Yeah, so let me answer that quickly, and then we'll get back to the demo. So this is actually specifically, this is your question, where I work in Azure networking. So hybrid computing, hybrid cloud computing, for someone who may not be aware of what that is effectively you have some resources that you're renting from a cloud provider. So you have some resources in Azure, and then you also have some resources in a data center that you manage, and you connect the two. So your resources in your physical data center that you manage can talk to the resources that you manage in Azure. And so you do see a lot of companies using this. There's a lot of reasons why some companies may deploy services that are kind of dependent on some legacy technology that they have on premises that aren't necessarily in the cloud yet. And so that's kind of one specific reason why you do see some hybrid technologies and some hybrid deployments.
Awesome.
Cool.
Do we have another question? Visual Studio is taking some time to sign in here.
No worries. Why can't an individual create a cloud and use it for themselves instead of renting it and be a part of a big group of servers?
So that's a really good question. That's a fun question. And I think to answer that, I'd point back to the physical map or the map I showed you at the beginning. So, I mean, the short answer is you really could, as an individual, you could spin up a data center, you could deploy all these servers, connect them to the internet, and then kind of create all the interfaces for someone to be able to start renting resources from you. But there is so much that goes into managing those physical data centers. Like I said, there are thousands and thousands of employees at Microsoft who actually run those physical data centers. And so if you're ambitious, if you want to go down that route of renting physical space, it is kind of doable technically, but there's a lot that goes into the management, the procurement of the physical services that are running Azure or other clouds.
Cool. Heather, how's it going?
Yeah, a little bit of delay in bandwidth here. Let's just keep doing questions while I'm trying to get this online.
All right, let's keep going. Let's see. What kind of programming languages can be used to create cloud applications? Maybe Heather, you would know this.
Yeah, so the answer to that is pretty much all of them. It's going to be highly dependent on what type of cloud resources you're using and whether or not you're going for an infrastructure as a service solution versus a platform as a service solution. But if you're doing something like a web app, which we're showing you here now, that supports many of the primary frameworks, including things like, of course, .NET Core, .NET Framework, Node.js, a variety of frameworks are included in the platform as a service. And then, of course, you could always go the route of having a VM run pretty much any type of framework or language that you want. And we also support many container solutions as well, which allows you to be framework or language independent. So really, I mean, whatever you can dream up to do, I'm certain that we have a resource that would allow you to do that.
Nice. All right, and then does building a software as a service SaaS web application count as cloud computing?
Yes. Michael, go ahead and take that one.
No, go for it, Heather. I can follow up. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of software as a service, software as a service takes advantage of the cloud. So for example, one would consider M365 to be a software as a service solution. And so it's taking advantage of the cloud on behalf of whoever is providing the software as a service. So in our case with M365, Microsoft is building software on top of the cloud, which is then used as a software as a service solution by your organization. So even though it may not be obvious and you don't really need to know how it's architected and how the cloud is being taken advantage of in that situation, it is still very much the case that it's a great example of the use of the cloud. And I've got the login working here, so we can go ahead and continue on the demo. So once I have my published profile up like this, I can create a new Azure App Service. And so to start with that, I'm going to have to give it a name. So I'll do build 2020 demo. I'll pick the resource group, which I already created, which if you remember in the portal was build 2020. And I'm going to go ahead and use this existing hosting plan, which tells Azure how I intend to pay for the resources that I'm using to create this website. Back to the sign-in page.
Our good friend.
Yes.
Making sure you're you, Heather.
Very dear friend. We take security very seriously. I think I saw one of the questions in the Q&A was, you know, how do I convince my boss that the cloud is a worthy investment and not just a way to throw his data out the window for anyone to access? I can assure you, as a developer at Microsoft, no one takes security and compliance more seriously than we do. You know, we put that above all other things, absolutely. And we make it a very high priority, and it's very, very difficult to circumvent that even internally as a Microsoft developer.
Cool.
So,
while we're waiting for that,
yep.
You want to do another question? Or?
Absolutely. So while we got this up, so right now I have my app service that I just created, my web app called Build 2020 Demo, and I can go ahead and click Finish. So now if we go back to this resource group, we see that my app service plan, that lets me scroll up, will be available. And so once I'm here, I can go ahead and click Publish, and that will deploy all of this code that I have here onto my app service in Azure. And so while that's waiting, we can take a few more questions, and then we'll see what we deployed.
Looks like we're actually at time now. So not sure if we have enough time, but we can try to address some of the questions in the chat or in the Q&A panel.
All right, great. Well, in that case, thank you everyone for coming. This was the last step of the demo, so all we need to do is wait for this resource to be spun up, and then if you go to the URL associated with the web app, you would see the website.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for the demo, Heather. And thank you everyone so much for coming. We'll try to address the questions in the Q&A panel. Otherwise, feel free to continue learning at docs.microsoft.com to learn. And we have some other great resources for students to get more involved with Azure, like the Imagine Cup, Microsoft Student Learn Ambassadors, Azure for Students. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. And we'll talk to you next time.